Okay, next you have a couple of exam questions. I'm going to quickly guide you through those exam questions. Actually, I'm going to quickly do it alongside with you. Let's see how many we pass, how many we fail. Haven't done those before. I'm going to do this to show you another overview of how to practice, because in the exam, one thing that you don't have to do is don't rush reading the questions. Properly read the question, carefully read the question, and try to actually understand exactly what they want out of you with that question. And then it's a lot of strategies to actually pick up the correct answer. If you know it, just pick and choose the correct answer. If you don't know it, then of course try to eliminate what's clearly not correct and give your best shot on the other options. So trade defense architectures. Okay, let's say next. So they said in here, what is true regarding Cisco SecureX architecture? Which, for example, this SecureX didn't show up in the blueprint, but I'm going to show you that it shows up on the Cisco representation. And of course, clearly this is pretty much one of those questions because the question is really targeted. What is true regarding that architecture? So it's here that in this use case, you ought to know what SecureX is, and you nail the answer, or you have no idea what SecureX is, and pretty much you just move on because there's no way you can actually eliminate something from there because the question is specifically what is SecureX pretty much. And SecureX is not a network-based solution that is context-aware. It's context-aware solution, no. It is based upon a plans-based approach to network security. It is a design guide for security deployment. Which answer should I choose? So it's clearly not an access solution because none of the answers actually seem to really define SecureX. So it's not a context-aware access solution. It is not based on an appliance, which means it's either A or B. And because it's not a design guide, it's either A or D. And because it's not a design guide, it should be a network-based solution that is context-aware. When authenticating users when implementing iOS zone-based policy firewall, which three methods are used by authentication proxy feature to perform inline authentication of users traversing the firewall? Now, first of all, zone-based policy firewall doesn't require authentication. That's optional. If authentication is enabled, then that's being done to proxy authentication. And also, as we saw on the blueprint, proxy authentication was not technically stated in there, right? So the options are going to be HTTP, FTP, and Telnet. Those are the options that the router can use to actually intercept users' traffic and authenticate it before allowing it and inspecting it through zone-based policy firewall. So it's not a question where we know the answer or we don't know the answer, and pretty much it is what it is. Let's say submit. So we have 2 out of 2 for this example. Let's go to threat defense. 6 questions next. Which network device plane is responsible for traffic forwarding functions? Likewise, you should know that is the data plane. Data plane is in charge with traffic forwarding, which means traffic transiting the router, not traffic destined to the router. Which type of NAT allows for different translations based on destination IP address? Likewise, this is actually one of the built-in definitions of policy NAT. So instantly you should go to policy NAT if you properly read the question and if you know what policy NAT means, which policy NAT allows you to NAT something differently, based on not only destination IP address, but also including based on destination IP address. So this is nothing else. Pretty much this question is, what is policy NAT? But it's in a different way. Which type of firewall best provides a rich set of application layer inspection capabilities? So C2VPL is not a firewall. MPF is not a firewall, it's a feature of the ASA firewall. And then we have to choose between a Cisco IS router and Cisco ASA. Now both of them provide a rich set of application and inspection capabilities, but I would choose the Cisco ASA because, technically speaking, on the iOS router, not the iOS router provides rich set of applications and DPI inspection. Not the iOS router does that, but the zone-based policy feature of the iOS router. So see, I mean, I'm going to choose ASA, and hopefully that's going to be the correct answer. We're going to see if it is or if it's not. But if you don't properly read the question, if you don't properly understand the technology, you may sit in here, oh, what is two correct answers? Because both the iOS router and the ASA do those things. Correct, but the ASA doesn't built in. When you say just Cisco ASA, it has those capabilities. But when you say Cisco IS router, it doesn't have those capabilities. It needs licensing, first of all, and second of all, it needs zone-based policy firewall configured to begin with, while the iOS has it built in. So it pretty much makes sense that it should be Cisco ASA. Then which two options are true regarding iOS zone-based policy firewall configuration? Choose two. And then they state inside and outside zones are created by default. No such thing. There's no default inside or outside zones. Communication of interfaces in the same zone is allowed by default. This depends, but in general, yes. In all of the neural codes, it is correct. By default, communication is not allowed between zones. So if we read this, it's not allowed between different zones, it is a correct statement. But they don't state it's not allowed between different zones. They state it's not allowed between zones. So I'm going to put it as correct, but do some more reading. A single zone pair automatically defines rules to allow bidirectional communication. And again, this is also depends. So this is also possibly correct. All zones can communicate with the router's self zone. The self zone doesn't belong to the router, it is there. So this is kind of like a very weird, let's say, answer. So we have to choose between those three. Clearly option number 2 is 100% correct. Now which one do we choose between the other ones? Now this is one of those things that I want to flip a coin, because option number 2, it looks to be more, let's say, closest to be the correct option, because by default communication is not allowed between different zones, but it's allowed between interfaces in the same zone. While the third option, which says a single zone pair automatically defines rules to allow bidirectional communication, this depends on the action you put, if you put a pass action or a inspect action. So it's one of those things that I'm not sure which answer would I put in the exam. I would choose to put the second one, although it misses the different keyword. So both of them are partially correct pretty much. None of none of those two options are 100% correct, because I'm missing some information pretty much. So I'm just going to flip a coin, choose that one next. Which IS command displays all configured static path or net translations? So not the configuration, they don't care about the configuration, but the translations. So it should be sharp in net translations. And submit. And we got 4 out of 5. So which one is wrong? The one with the firewall, or I have chosen the second one. I have chosen this one, which they said is not correct. As I said, technically speaking, this statement is correct if they would have stated by default communication is not allowed between different zones. That's correct. But if they just state between zones, may not be correct, because communication between interfaces of the same zone is allowed by default. And also this option is not 100% correct, because as I said, it depends on the firewall action that you configure in there. because depending on if you put a pass action, it's going to be a unidirectional communication. If you put a inspect action, it's going to be a bidirectional communication. So none of them were correct. I flipped a coin and I didn't get the points. But again, you may have like, one, two, maybe, 3 questions, I don't know, a couple of questions like this which may not be 100% clear, but it doesn't mean that it's enough to fail the exam. So in the exam, you're going to have like 1, 2 questions which are not clear 100%, so you just flip a coin. You may have 1, 2 questions which you have no idea of what they're trying to ask you about. But the rest of them, if they work, if there are no bugs, it means that you should pass the exam. Because you cannot fail the exam because you failed 5 questions, because some of them were not technically, let's say, easily understandable, and some of them may have some, glitches in there. Okay, let's go to the other options as well. Management service on Cisco devices. The following review questions are taken. Okay, next. Which 3 benefits of implementing NTP? Choose 3. So, line correlation is one of them. That's one use case of NTP, to make sure that all devices put the proper timestamps to the log messages. To set router or switch device time. Okay, let's mark it. To set network devices as Stratum 0 devices, no. PKI certificate validation, correct. SSO authentication, correct. So we have 4 answers and we know only 3. And I'm going to remove this one based on the following logic. This is the action. This is what you do when you configure NTP. You set the router or switch device time to be synchronized correctly. That is not a benefit. So this is what I assume to be correct. We're going to see what is correct or not in the end. But this is my logic in here, and that's why, as I stated, you have to carefully read the question and the answers, because you may easily state that that's a correct answer, which from my point of view, because I ended up with 4 correct answers, not 3, that's actually a wrong answer, because that's the action when you put NTP on the device, not the benefit of putting NTP on the device. So you don't put NTP on the device for the benefit of having NTP synchronized. You put NTP on a device for the benefit of line correlation, SSO authentication, and certificate validation. Which 2 are common NA protocols used when configuring Cisco network device for management access? Clearly, we should know that. It should be TACACS and Radius. Like NTP is not an option. Either way, POP is not an option. NTLM and LDAP are options, Active Directory and LDAP, but those are not commonly used. So we have 2 out of 2 correct in this use case. So it means my logic in there with the NTP was good. And then the last part is going to be Cisco Security Devices GUI Secure CLI Management. 2 questions, let's say next, or actually it's 1 question. Which feature does the ASA identifier provide? Granular access based on user's identity. Correct. But let's also confirm that we don't have any other options. So what I'm trying to say in here is that if you read a question and the first answer looks to be correct, don't just move on. Read the other answers as well, because they may give you a better answer, which actually is even better than the initial correct answer. Because in the end, if on a question you have like 2 correct answers, both of them valid, you have to choose the one which best meets the question requirements. So for sure, in general, one is better than the other. So that's why if you believe that the first answer is correct, don't just click it and move on, but read through all answers. So it's access control based on user's IP address. It is not correct. Access control based on interactive, not correct. Access control via AD integration. That is actually, so to have identifiable, I'm not doing AD integration, I'm running an agent, so this is not correct. Even though I'm reading the AD user logging information, I'm not doing AD integration. So that's why this is not correct, and this one, the first one, should be correct. Let's see summit survey. And we have 1 out of 1. Now, a couple of questions in here. So from Matthew, all Cisco exams I have taken have had ambiguous questions like that question, poorly written. So yes, some of the exams, I mean, in my experience, let's say I had also bad experience with some Cisco exams, but even though we had some poorly written questions, most of them, like most of the, if in an exam you have like 70 questions, in my experience, like 60 plus of them were enough, let's say, were good written, like enough, not perfectly good written from my point of view, and probably from your point of view as well, because we haven't designed the questions. But it was a good enough question to be able to provide a proper answer. Yes, some of them are not perfectly stated in there, but it doesn't mean it's enough for you to fail the exam. That's why I stated that go in the exam as prepared as possible. Because I'm going to give you another example. I'm going to give you another example. Initially, when I took the CCIE written exam for security, which means I was preparing for my CCIE security track, I passed the exam, but I struggled a lot in the exam because I was not at the proper level. Like after I got CCIE security certified, I passed the written, I passed the lab exam. And 2 years later, when I become more experienced and I had a better understanding of the technologies, and I went back to take the written just to recertify, even of course the written has changed. And even though I had also questions which seemed poorly written or tricky or something, because I was way more knowledgeable, I found it easy to understand actually what they meant in there. So it is an exam, we have to play by the Cisco's rules. As long as you go in the exam as prepared as possible, you're going to have good chances on passing. Of course, assuming there are no bugs in the exam, because if there are bugs in the exam, raise a ticket and they should fix that up in there. Give you a voucher to resit, and of course I would wait to resit in there. And likewise, one recommendation I give to all of you, and it's going to be a general recommendation: never go and take an exam like the next day it was released, because clearly, I mean, Cisco, it's humans doing the questions, right? It's humans doing the simulates in there. So clearly there's going to be some kind of bugs or errors in there. So I would not go the next day to take the exam. I would give it a couple of months till Cisco, fixes their problems, and then go take the exam to have good chances to be given a working exam in there, not one with a couple of bugs in there which gets me frustrated. Another question from Mark. Yes, I failed a couple of weeks ago. There were a number of questions relating to Cisco Prime infrastructure. The configuration of the SA using SDM didn't work correctly. I put exactly the same configuration in 3 times, and 1/3 time it worked. So I'm going to comment on the second aspect. If it worked the 3rd time, make sure, because that's a simlet, make sure that you configure things within the proper order. Like for example, if you would have to configure an access list, make sure that you follow up on the correct order of operation, because that's a simlet, and otherwise you may have unexpected behavior. I don't know if that was the case or not, but just a general recommendation. So if you have to configure an ACL with the ASDM GUI, then just go first and configure the objects, then go configure the ACL and reference the objects, and then apply the ACL. So that's the correct order of operation. Of course, on an ASA device, you may just, apply the ACL and then configure it, or, the other way around is going to work, because it's a real device. And it's less, let's say, it's less susceptible to, to be full of bugs and not to work. But yes, I know simulets have problems in there. But again, if that happens, so if it doesn't work, if you click back and forth, if it doesn't work, then ask the proctor who proctors your exam, hey, the simlet doesn't work. He's going to freeze the exam. At that point, stop the exam and instantly call support of VA person services, and you have a ticket lively open at that point. They can investigate, and of course they can give you the money back in there. So ideally you should do it this way, because if you just complain after the exam has finished that a SimNet didn't work, actually as it was in your case, maybe if you do it 3 times it's going to work. So if the SimNet does not work, you cannot click, you cannot configure properly, instantly go to the proctor and tell him, hey, I have an exam issue. They should come in, stop the exam, pause the exam, and raise a ticket with Pearson VUE to analyze what the problem is. Now before we get going, a couple of things which I wanted to show you on the Cisco Live presentation. So because And one more thing which I want to make sure everybody is on the same side with me in here. For example, Prime Security Manager, it's a product which is end of life, right? So you might say like, why do I get those questions in the current CCNP blueprint exam? Because when the current blueprint was designed, Prime Security Manager was a valid Cisco product, so it is what it is. Now, second of all, if you look in the blueprint and you see in the blueprint, for example, take the blueprint in here, and you see in the blueprint 25% of the questions to be related to pretty much those topics. It doesn't mean they can give those 25% equally shared. They can give, let's say that's 10 questions. They can give those 10 questions to be 5 of them about DHCP snooping, and 5 of them about NAT on the ASA. That is fair game. No, there's nowhere stated that you should get 10 questions equally shared among the topics. It is an exam, okay? Now looking back at the Cisco Live presentation, I had recommended to also walk through this. I'm not gonna look through it entirely. So it is the look on Cisco Live about Sense, and you're going to find a presentation in there. Now what I want to show you is, for example, in section 1.0, they give a couple of questions in there, couple of question types. For example, this is something which is for me is unexpected, that in this section, Cisco Security Device GUI and Secure CLI Management, on the Cisco Live presentation, they state that you should know implementing those modules, which for me doesn't make sense because those modules are being presented fully in the other exam of CITCS. So I'm not sure if this is a mistake in the presentation, or they just meant to state that you have to know Prime Security Manager pretty much. And as you can see, they even tell you which version. Okay, a couple of things, other things which I wanted to show in here. So go to this presentation and read it carefully. I think it is, yes, in this section. So if you look in the blueprint, this doesn't show up, or I may have not seen it properly. Let's look back on section 6.0, on section 6.0 of the blueprint. Yes, it doesn't show up. But so this is something which doesn't show up specifically on the blueprint. And if you look in more details in here, they speak about what you need to know. IPv6 first hop security technologies, which implies you need to know how IPv6 works. And threat comparison best practices between v4 and v6, which means you need to know how IPv6 works. And they give you likewise some links in there. So I highly recommend you to go to this document, because you're going to find some useful reference in there based on what they ask you to prepare for the exam, which is additional things as opposed to the blueprint.